Hey, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, it's the Friday show, and I'm Sam Sachs, ready to do the news. Now, let me just press the button that starts the show. I have to be careful because it's next to the one that ejects me from the seat in case of an emergency. And we begin at the United States Supreme Court, where the White House sought to constrain the power of the judiciary, and at least some of the justices appear willing to oblige. The case revolves around President Trump's executive order repealing birthright citizenship, but not whether that order is constitutional. Instead, whether lower courts that found it unconstitutional can impose nationwide injunctions to stop its implementation. The government filed an emergency application to the High Court after judges in Maryland, Massachusetts, and Washington blocked the order. DOJ lawyers claim the Constitution does not give judges the power to issue nationwide injunctions. Instead, their ruling should only apply to the litigants before them in the case, or when states sue, just the residents of that state. Now, it's easy to see how this would become unworkable. For example, if a judge in Maryland rules that everyone in the state is protected from Trump's order because it will do irreparable harm and is blatantly unconstitutional, the government claims it can go ahead and start stripping citizenship away from everyone in Virginia or Florida or Texas or whatever state that hasn't gone to court yet. So you'd have babies being born in some states that receive full citizenship and in other states that don't. Quote, chaos would ensue, said lawyers in the case challenging the government. And besides, it's not like the government suffers irreparable harm by a nationwide injunction. It just has to wait until the legal questions are resolved before it can implement its desired policy. An individual who has their citizenship stripped, however, could suffer irreparable consequences while waiting for the case to be settled. They could, for example, be sent to a foreign prison in El Salvador. Nationwide injunctions have probably saved hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals living in the U.S. from being illegally deported. And the government has shown that once it inflicts that harm on people, it's unwilling to remedy it. In the case of men sent to the torture prison in El Salvador, the White House now claims that there's nothing courts can do to bring them back, not even the Supreme Court. Now, I know what you're wondering. Surely the justices wouldn't vote to reduce the power of their own branch, right? Well, as SCOTUS blog reported, all 5 conservatives on the court have signed on to opinions in the past to limit judges' injunctive powers. And earlier this month, the conservative majority on the Supreme Court lifted a nationwide injunction and allowed the president to carry out his ban on transgender military service, which allowed the administration to inflict harm on trans people, even though a judge found the ban unconstitutional and even though the case hasn't been resolved yet. Now on to Gaza, where Israel dropped bombs overnight at a rate not seen since the early days of its war on the enclave, with news reports suggesting that President Trump's patience with Prime Minister Netanyahu is wearing thin and pressure is building for a ceasefire. The Israeli leader is going scorched earth. More than 140 Palestinians were killed across the Strip in a single day of Israeli bombing on Thursday, from the Jabalia refugee camp in the north down to Khan Yunis in the south. Tents sheltering displaced war victims were bombed. Israeli ground troops moved into Bet Lahia, forcing hundreds of civilians to flee their homes, and new reports of extremist Israeli settlers setting fire to Palestinians' property in the West Bank. The intensified bombing coincided with the 77th anniversary of the Nakba, when 750,000 Palestinians were forced out of their homes to make way for the ethno-supremacist Jewish state. It was an ethnic cleansing campaign that's really never ended. President Trump has mostly ignored the killing while he jets around the Middle East making business deals with monarchies. While in Qatar, though, he made another pitch for the U.S. to take over Gaza and turn it into a, quote, freedom zone. The plan, which would result in millions of Palestinians being displaced, has been condemned around the world. And finally, buzzing over to Capitol Hill now, where it seems each day we're treated to a new horror being tucked into the Republicans' budget bill. Lawmakers on the House Ways and Means Committee advanced a measure that allows the government to target the tax-exempt status of nonprofit groups based on speech the president doesn't like. Here's how the ACLU described it. Quote, "This provision, known formally as H.R. 9495, would grant the executive branch the power to effectively shut down any nonprofit organization, including news outlets, universities, and civil liberties groups, by accusing them of supporting terrorism and using that accusation to suspend their tax-exempt status without any real due process." The bill was previously called the Nonprofit Killer when it was introduced in the last session of Congress, amid a Red Scare environment against pro-Palestinian activism. It failed to get a vote in the Senate thanks to a groundswell of opposition from civil liberties groups. It's now been revived by Republicans who hope they can sneak it into law by attaching it to a broader budget reconciliation bill that would only need a simple majority to pass the Senate. If approved, it would codify what Trump has already threatened to do: yank the tax-exempt status of organizations in revenge for engaging in work like support for migrants or support for LGBTQ youth. That's stuff that runs counter to Trump's agenda. The Republicans' full budget package and all the wretched provisions contained within it is expected to be voted on next week. The workers who bring you Sesame Street are now fully unionized. While most of the actors, puppeteers, and production crew behind the timeless children's show have been represented by various labor organizations, the producers who work for the nonprofit Sesame Workshop finally got their own union. The National Labor Relations Board certified election results from last month, in which 74% of workers voted to join the Office and Professional Employees International Union, Local 153. The organizing victory comes at a critical time for workers on the show whose jobs and editorial freedoms are under threat. Sesame Street just recently lost a multi-million-dollar distribution deal with HBO, and the President of the United States has some sort of grudge against PBS, which airs Sesame Street. He wants Republicans in Congress to defund the channel, even though PBS only relies on a small percentage of appropriated funds. The workers announced the union in early March and asked management to recognize it. Instead, bosses at the Sesame Workshop fought it with everything. Immediately after the campaign went public, the company fired almost 100 workers, including organizers, which is illegal. According to The Nation, some of the workers fired had been at Sesame Workshop for decades, and many didn't receive any sort of severance. One of the fired workers told the outlet that the company has a rainy day fund worth hundreds of millions of dollars to get the show through this rainy day, but instead it chose to do mass layoffs in order to crush the union. The company also bombarded workers with anti-union propaganda and threats, but ultimately, workers affirmed their decision to join the OPEIU, and it wasn't even close, really. The vote was 55-45. to 19. The New York Times reported on the unprecedented military buildup underway on the southern border. The number of active duty troops deployed there increased from about 2,500 at the end of the Biden administration to now 8,600 and growing. This is from the paper. Quote, "In the past 4 months, the Pentagon has sent thousands of active duty combat troops and armored Stryker combat vehicles to the southwestern border to confront what President Trump declared on his first day in office was an invasion of migrants, drug cartels, and smugglers. The military has also dispatched U-2 spy planes, surveillance drones, helicopters, and even 2 Navy warships to surveil the borders and coasts around the clock. The border mission has so far cost the public more than $500 million. It's not clear when the mission will end, and the military's footprint in the area keeps expanding. Now, it's claimed by the administration that the troops are there just to support immigration authorities and are not themselves engaged in any law enforcement activities. Though the White House has considered invoking the Insurrection Act in order to use the military for direct law enforcement purposes, even against U.S. cities. The troops pose not just a domestic threat, though, they also pose a threat to Mexico. Obviously, any country seeing a neighbor build up troops on its border is concerning. Those of us who play Civilization know all about that. In his first term, Trump wanted to use the military to bomb the cartels in Mexico. He was talked out of it, though, by his advisors. This time around, he's surrounded by people who do want to do it. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum said her government would not support the U.S. military carrying out airstrikes or raids in her country. And President Trump does seem to have a good relationship for now with her. However, listen to what Trump's deportations are, the abominable Tom Homan said in a recent interview.
What would you like to see DOD do? Would you like to see SOCOM JSOC units go into Mexico and rid the cartel?
I won't get ahead of the president on that, but I don't think the cartels are going to go away without U.S. involvement. President Trump did it, ISIS. We show we're really good at the away game. I think when it comes to criminal cartels, we got to play the away game. Stop the poison before it gets here.
Well, that's concerning. Homan saying he doesn't want to get ahead of the president on this would suggest the president is planning something that Homan knows about. Republicans in Congress want to help. Congressman Greg Steube introduced an authorization for the use of military force against 9 specific Mexican drug cartels. Okay, then. You go in first, Greg. No one can escape the long arm of MMN. It's time to name and shame. This week's Rich Dick is Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. For anyone questioning if Noem's wealthy enough to qualify for this segment, she recently had her $4,000 purse stolen with $3,000 in cash inside it, so yeah, she's rich enough. Noem certainly has the attitude of an oligarch. As secretary, she wants to upgrade her travel package. The department submitted a request to Congress for $50 million for a new Gulfstream 5 jet to fly Noem and other top officials around in. She has a bit of a habit of lavish travel on the public's dime. Back in March, the Associated Press analyzed expenses from last year that then South Dakota Governor Noem racked up while flying around the country, stumping for Trump and partying. $150,000 worth of expenses, in fact. And over her 6 years as governor, the travel bill was a whopping $640,000. This is from the Wire service. Quote, the expenditures include $7,555 in airfare for a 6-day trip to Paris, where she gave a speech at a right-wing gathering, costs associated with a bear hunt in Canada with her niece, and a book tour that included a stop in New York. An additional $2,200 stemmed from a controversial trip last year to Houston for dental work she showcased on Instagram. Now, as DHS Secretary, Noem has continued traveling, mostly for photo ops, pretending to do immigrant raids in New York City in a Kevlar vest, cosplaying as some sort of cowgirl on the border with the hat and horse and everything. She once pretended to be a Coast Guard unit. She also flew down to El Salvador's torture prison for another photo op, using incarcerated human beings as a backdrop. That's all pretty gross, but it somehow gets even worse. Because this week, the Daily Mail broke the news that under Noem's watch, the Department of Homeland Security is working with the producer of Duck Dynasty to develop a reality TV show that will pit immigrants against each other to compete for the prize of citizenship. It's a show called The American, and it will feature 12 contestants who will ride around the country on a train called The American, competing in events like rolling logs in Wisconsin or putting together a Model T Ford in Detroit. You know, stuff that real Americans still do. In addition, the outlet reported that the pitch for the show, quote, names Colombian-born Sofia Vergara, Canadian Ryan Reynolds, and Mila Kunis, who hails from Ukraine, as possible hosts, who'd greet each contestant with a welcome gift, a personalized baseball glove. Contestants would then travel state to state, meeting interesting Americans and learning about the history, culture, and quirks of each region. Viewers, in turn, will learn about each wannabe American and why they want to live here. The winner gets sworn in as a U.S. citizen on the steps of the Capitol by a, quote, top American politician or judge. Oh God, it's probably going to be Judge Jeanine, isn't it? Homeland Security spokesperson, the lying Tricia McLaughlin, confirmed to the Daily Mail that agency staff is indeed reviewing the pitch and that she thinks it's a good idea. She claimed Noem hadn't been briefed on it yet, but sources told the outlet that's not true. Noem knows all about it and supports it. Hell, my guess is the secretary's itching to make a few on-screen appearances too. I mean, she's reportedly decorated the offices at DHS with blow-ups of all her photo ops, so of course she's involved in the dang TV show. The secretary is presiding over a mass deportation program that is ruining the lives of thousands of U.S. residents. Over 50,000 migrants are currently locked in ICE detention, and at least 9 have died in custody. And the president has shut down all asylum pathways for migrants to gain legal status in the U.S. unless they're white South Africans. So going on Secretary Noem's Hunger Games-style competition for the amusement of American audiences will be one of the only ways non-white migrants can now obtain citizenship. This is pretty damn depraved. And it's why Kristi Noem is this week's Rich Dick. All right, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise from Minnesota. It was sent in by Andrea in Minneapolis, land of the Dakota people. Enjoy. Thank you, Andrea. That's the show. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Find more MMN at means.tv. We also have a YouTube and podcast channel, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. One day, capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. See you next week.